I died on our wedding day. When I opened my eyes 5 years in the past, I swore this time would be different. Elena was the love of my life. I gave her everything, my time, my heart, and my money for her father's failing business. But while I was building our future, she was meeting her ex Marcus behind my back. Their secret texts, late-night work meetings, and hushed phone calls were all signs I missed. Worse, I discovered the car crash that killed me wasn't an accident. Elena and her father planned it after I found out about her affair. They smiled at my funeral while already spending my inheritance. Now I'm back, watching history repeat itself. But this time, I'm building my empire while she begs for help. Some say revenge is best served cold. I say it's best served by walking away stronger. I died with her name on my lips. The car spun out of control on that rainy bridge, metal twisting as I plunged into the icy water below. My last thought was of Elena. How she had looked earlier that night when I confronted her about the affair, the flash of cold calculation behind her tears. Then darkness. When I opened my eyes again, I was staring at the ceiling of my old apartment, the one I'd sold 5 years ago to help Elena's father save his company. Sunlight streamed through half-drawn blinds, and my phone buzzed with a text. From Elena. Can't wait to see you tonight. Love you. I checked the date on my phone and felt my stomach drop. 5 years in the past. The day I first met her parents. The beginning of everything. At first, I thought I was losing my mind. Maybe the accident had been a vivid nightmare, a strange premonition. But as the days passed, I realized the truth was far more impossible. I had been given a second chance. I remembered everything. Our whirlwind romance, our engagement, how I'd invested my inheritance in her father's business, and how she betrayed me with Marcus the night before our wedding. I remembered dying. For the first week, I was in shock. I went through the motions, meeting her for coffee at our usual spot, listening to her talk about her day at work, her dreams for the future, our future, she said. I studied her face as she spoke, searching for signs of the woman who would one day help orchestrate my death. But all I saw was the woman I had fallen in love with. James, are you listening? Elena waved her hand in front of my face, pulling me from my thoughts. Sorry, I said, forcing a smile. Just thinking about work. She pouted playfully. Well, think about our anniversary instead. I've made reservations at that Italian place you love. Our anniversary dinner. The first red flag I had missed. That night, as I was getting ready, Elena called. James, I'm so sorry. There's an emergency at work. Richard needs all hands on deck for this client presentation tomorrow. Rain check. In my first life, I had been disappointed but understanding. I had sent her encouraging texts and waited up with takeout for when she got home. This time, I knew better. Of course, I said, keeping my voice light. No problem. Good luck with the presentation. As soon as we hung up, I grabbed my keys. 20 minutes later, I was parked across from Marcus's apartment building, watching Elena, dressed not for work, but in a black dress I had bought her, walked through the front door. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. It wasn't a recent development then. Their affair hadn't started just before our wedding, as I had believed. It had been happening all along, right under my nose. Part of me wanted to storm up there, confront them both, end this charade immediately. But a colder, calmer voice inside me said, wait, watch, learn. You have time now. Use it. I drove home in silence, the reality of my situation sinking in. I had been given a second chance, yes, but not to save our relationship. It was beyond saving. It had never been real to begin with. This was a chance to save myself. The next morning, Elena showed up at my apartment with coffee and pastries, full of stories about the work emergency. I smiled and nodded, playing my part, but inside I felt something hardening. As she chattered about her coworkers, I noticed how easily the lies came to her, how she sprinkled in just enough truth to make her story believable. You seem different today, she said suddenly, her head tilted in that way that used to make my heart race. Do I? I took a sip of coffee, just tired, I think. She studied me for a moment, then shrugged it off. But I saw it, the first flicker of concern that her hold on me might not be as complete as she thought. Over the next weeks, I made subtle changes. I declined to join her for dinner with her parents twice, citing work. I didn't immediately answer her texts. I started exercising again, something I had given up as our relationship progressed, and I devoted more time to supporting her career. Elena noticed. Of course she did. She was too skilled at manipulation not to sense when her target's behavior changed. She doubled down on her affection, surprising you with gifts, planning elaborate date nights. To anyone else, it would have looked like a woman deeply in love. To me, with the benefit of hindsight, it looked like damage control. Meanwhile, I began planning. Instead of funneling my savings into gifts for Alina or investments in her father's company, I started setting money aside. I reconnected with old colleagues I had drifted away from during my relationship with Alina. I began researching her family's business, looking for the weaknesses I had been blind to before. One evening, as I was going through some documents Alina had left at my place, I found a folder her father had given her to pass along to me. Information about the investment opportunity that, in my previous life, I had jumped at. Flipping through the pages with new eyes, I saw red flags everywhere. Inconsistent projections, vague references to assets, circular explanations of business strategies. How had I missed this before? The answer was simple: love. Or what I had thought was love. That night, Alina called to confirm our plans for the weekend. Her father wanted to discuss business opportunities, she said excitedly. It was the perfect chance for us to secure our future together. I'm looking forward to it, I lied, thinking of the future I was now planning, one that looked very different from anything Alina could imagine. Meeting with Alina's father, Robert Pierce, was surreal. In my previous life, this dinner had been the beginning of my financial downfall. The night I agreed to invest nearly my entire inheritance in his struggling company. I remembered how proud I had felt when he clapped me on the shoulder and welcomed me to the family, how I had interpreted his calculating gaze as respect. "James," he said, extending his hand across the polished mahogany table of his home office. "Alina tells me you've been quite successful with your investments." I shook his hand firmly, noticing how he assessed me, like appraising livestock. "I've been fortunate." Alina sat beside me, her hand resting on my thigh possessively. She was wearing the pearl earrings I had given her for Christmas, a subtle reminder of my generosity. "Fortune favors the bold," Robert replied, pouring 3 glasses of scotch, "which is why I wanted to discuss an opportunity with you." He launched into his pitch, the same one I had heard before. His company, Pierce Innovations, was developing revolutionary medical devices, but needed capital to scale production before their competitors beat them to market. The potential returns were enormous, he assured me, but time was of the essence. In my first life, I had been dazzled by projections and promises. This time, I listened for what wasn't being said. "These projected revenues seem optimistic," I said, pointing to a chart in his presentation. "What's your contingency if the FDA approval is delayed?" Robert's smile faltered momentarily. "We have excellent relationships with the regulatory bodies. I don't anticipate any issues. Still, it's a significant risk factor. I'd like to see more detailed financial statements before making any decisions." Alina's hand tightened on my thigh, her nails digging in slightly. "A warning." "Of course," Robert said smoothly. "I can have my CFO prepare those for you. But I should mention, we have other investors lined up. I hate for you to miss out while waiting for paperwork." The classic pressure tactic. I recognized it clearly now. "I understand, but I never rush financial decisions. I'm sure you appreciate that kind of caution in business." Later that night, as we drove home, Alina was unusually quiet. "Everything okay?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Dad was really counting on your support. He's giving you a chance because of me, you know. I kept my eyes on the road. I just need more information before committing that kind of money. It's standard due diligence. Don't you trust me?" she asked, her voice soft and hurt. 5 years ago, that question would have gutted me. I would have apologized, assured her of my complete faith, probably called her father the next morning to accept the deal. Now I simply said, "This isn't about trust. It's about business." Over the next few weeks, I began implementing my plan. I quietly consulted with a financial advisor about alternative investment options. I reconnected with my old college friend Michael, now a successful tech entrepreneur, and secured a modest but strategic investment in his startup. Meanwhile, Alina grew increasingly anxious. She alternated between affection and irritation, clearly confused by my newfound independence. Her father called twice, each time emphasizing the limited window of opportunity and expressing concern that I didn't seem to appreciate what he was offering. What I was doing wasn't just about avoiding a bad investment. During my research into Pierce Innovations, I had discovered troubling irregularities. Funds moving through shell companies, partnerships with suppliers that didn't seem to exist, patent applications with suspicious similarities to designs from smaller companies that had mysteriously gone bankrupt. One evening, working late at my office, I discovered something even more disturbing. An email chain forwarded to me accidentally by Robert's assistant included messages discussing the James problem and how it might require direct intervention if he starts asking questions. The email was dated 3 weeks before my fatal accident in my previous life. My blood ran cold. It hadn't been just Alina's affair with Marcus that led to my death. It had been my beginning to question where my money had gone, why the promised returns hadn't materialized. I had become a liability. I printed the email and locked it in my desk drawer, then sat back, trying to process this revelation. The betrayal ran deeper than I had imagined. Not just my heart had been broken. My life had been deliberately ended. That night, Elena called to invite me to dinner with her and Marcus, which she introduced as an old friend from college who's in town for business. The audacity was almost impressive. Actually, I have plans tonight, I told her. Rain check. Since when do you have plans I don't know about? She asked, failing to keep the accusation out of her voice. I'm meeting with Michael about his startup. That loser from college? Why waste time on his pipe dreams when my father is offering you a real opportunity? I felt a surge of anger but kept my voice calm. Michael's company just secured series of funding and already invested. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. You invested in his company without discussing it with me first. It's my money, Elena. But we're planning a future together. These decisions affect both of us. You're right, I said, letting a hint of coldness enter my voice. Maybe we should talk about our future plans more explicitly, and about honesty in relationships. The subtle threat hung in the air. For a moment, I thought she might confess, come clean about Marcus. Instead, she backpedaled quickly. Of course, honey. I just want what's best for us. Have fun with Michael tonight. After hanging up, I didn't go to Michael's. Instead, I drove to an attorney's office across town, where I began the process of creating a new corporation with ironclad protection for my assets. The attorney looked confused when I insisted on specific clauses preventing any future spouse from accessing certain holdings, but she didn't question it. That weekend, I told Elena I needed to travel for business. Instead, I flew to meet with a former colleague who now worked for a competitor of Pierce Innovations. Over drinks, she confirmed my suspicions. Pierce has been floating on investor money for years, she told me. They haven't had a viable product since their initial patent expired. Rumor is they've been falsifying research results to keep the funding coming. And no one's called them out. She shrugged. Their investors tend to stay quiet or disappear. When I returned, Elena was waiting at my apartment with dinner and an expensive watch, a gift to celebrate our future. As she fastened it around my wrist, her lips brushing my cheek, I felt nothing but a cold clarity. I knew exactly what I needed to do. Using the seed capital from my investment with Michael, I quietly launched my own medical technology company, Nexus Innovations, drawing on knowledge from my previous life, trends that wouldn't emerge for years, technologies that would revolutionize the industry. I positioned Nexus as a forward-thinking alternative to established players like Pierce. I hired talented engineers who had been overlooked by larger companies. I secured patents for designs that I knew would become industry standards. And I did it all under a holding company that couldn't be traced back to me. As far as Elena and her father knew, I was still mulling over their investment offer while working my regular job. Elena grew increasingly restless with my hesitation. Dad says the window is closing. She told me over dinner one night. Other investors are lining up. Good for them, I replied, taking a sip of wine. Maybe they can review the complete financial statements I never received. Her smile tightened. You know how busy they are with the expansion. Those documents take time to prepare properly. It's been 6 weeks, Elena. Do you not trust my family? Her eyes narrowed slightly. After everything we've been through? It was strange, hearing those words again. In my first life, they had worked perfectly. I had immediately backpedaled, apologized, promised to sign the papers the next day. This time, I simply held her gaze. Trust is earned through transparency, in business and in relationships. She set down her fork, her expression shifting to wounded vulnerability. What does that mean? Are you having doubts about us? Part of me still wanted to comfort her, to erase the hurt look on her face. That part was shrinking every day, but it was still there. I forced myself to remember the email about the James problem and stayed firm. I'm just saying that major life decisions require complete information. Later that night, I pretended to sleep as Elena made a hushed phone call from our bathroom. I couldn't hear all of it, but what I caught was enough. He's asking too many questions, and we need to accelerate the timeline. The next morning, I made an excuse about an early meeting and left before she woke up. Instead of going to my office, I drove to a private investigator I had hired. He handed me a flash drive with security footage showing Elena entering and leaving Marcus's apartment building on multiple occasions over the past month. There's more, he said grimly. Your girlfriend and this Marcus guy met with her father at his lake house last weekend. I couldn't get close enough to hear anything, but they seemed pretty intense. The lake house meeting was new, something that hadn't happened in my previous timeline. I was changing things by not playing my assigned role. Good. Back at my apartment, I went through the flash drive contents, stopping at one particular image. Elena, Marcus, and Robert seated around the lake house table, reviewing what looked like documents with my name on them. Insurance papers. The same insurance policy that had paid out after my accident. I felt a cold sweat break over me. They were already planning my death, and we weren't even engaged yet. I had underestimated how much my resistance to investing had accelerated their plans. That night, Elena was unusually affectionate. She prepared my favorite meal, wore the dress I had once mentioned loving, and talked about our future with sparkling eyes. Looking at her, it was almost possible to believe she loved me. "I was thinking," she said, refilling my wine glass, "we should take a trip to the lake house this weekend. Dad says we could use a break from the city, and you seem so stressed lately." The lake house, where they had discussed my insurance policy. "That sounds nice," I lied, "but I need to finish a project this weekend." Her smile dimmed slightly. "You've been working too hard. One weekend away won't hurt." "I'll make it up to you," I promised, wondering if she could hear the hollowness in my voice. After dinner, as she cleared the dishes, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Funding secured." Word go. It was the confirmation I've been waiting for. My anonymous investment in Nexus Innovations had been supplemented by venture capital funding, enough to move forward with our first major product launch, a product that would directly compete with Pierce's flagship device. When Alina returned to the table, I excused myself to make a quick work call. In the bathroom, I sent a series of pre-arranged messages that would set things in motion. By tomorrow afternoon, Nexus would announce its new technology. By the end of the week, Pierce Innovations would be facing questions from investors about their own progress. When I returned, Elena was looking at her phone with a furrowed brow. "Everything okay?" I asked. She looked up, startled. "Just work stuff. Marketing challenges," she was lying. I'd seen Marcus's name on her screen. The next day, business news was dominated by the Nexus announcement. Pierce Innovations stock took an immediate hit as investors questioned whether they had been leapfrogged by a newcomer. I watched from my office as the financial channels covered the story, knowing that Robert Pierce was probably having the worst day of his professional life. When I got home that evening, Elena was waiting, her expression tense. "Did you see the news about that new company? Nexus something?" I nodded. "Interesting technology." "Why?" "Dad's company shares dropped 12% today. He's devastated." I arranged my face into a mask of concern. "That's unfortunate. Maybe I dodged a bullet by waiting on that investment." Her eyes flashed with anger before she controlled herself. "That's a terrible thing to say. My father's company is still a solid investment. This is just a temporary setback." "Of course," I said. "I'm sure everything will work out exactly as it should." That night, lying in bed beside Elena, listening to her pretend to sleep while exchanging texts with someone, I reached a decision. The evidence I had gathered about Pierce Innovations' fraudulent practices would be enough to trigger an investigation. The emails suggesting my planned accident would interest law enforcement even more. I could destroy them all with a single phone call. But revenge wasn't my goal. Not anymore. What I wanted was freedom, from Elena, from the Pierces, from the future that had ended with me drowning in my car. And for that, I needed leverage, not destruction. At least, not yet. The next morning, Elena left early for an emergency meeting at her office. I knew she was actually meeting with her father and Marcus to discuss damage control. While she was gone, I went through her laptop, finding exactly what I expected. Documents outlining the Pierce family's contingency plans, including moving assets offshore in case of regulatory scrutiny. I copied everything, then carefully returned the laptop exactly as I had found it. The information was my insurance policy now. When Elena returned, her face was drawn with stress. "James," she said, sitting beside me on the couch, "I need to ask you something important." Here it comes, I thought. "My father's company needs an emergency capital injection to counter this Nexus situation. I know you've been hesitant, but this is different. This is about saving my family's legacy." She took my hands in hers, tears welling in her eyes. "If you love me, you'll help us. Please." In my first life, those tears would have undone me completely. Now I saw them for what they were, weapons in her arsenal. "How much does he need?" I asked, already knowing the answer. $2 million. It's a lot, I know, but it would be a loan, not an investment. Completely secure. I nodded slowly, as if considering. "I'll think about it." The relief on her face was immediate. She threw her arms around me, pressing kisses to my face. "I knew you'd come through for us, for me. As she held me, I closed my eyes, steeling myself against the familiar scent of her perfume, the warmth of her body against mine. This was the moment when I fully accepted that the woman I had loved had never really existed. She was a mirage, a carefully constructed fiction designed to separate me from my money and eventually my life. The realization didn't hurt as much as I expected. Instead, I felt a strange sense of peace. The last lingering doubt, the last whisper of maybe she really did love me once, faded away. I was finally free. The announcement came 3 weeks later. Nexus Innovations revealed its revolutionary medical monitoring system, complete with working prototypes and FDA fast-track approval. I watched from the sidelines as industry experts hailed it as a game-changer, predicting it would dominate the market within a year. Pierce Innovations' stock plummeted overnight. News outlets ran stories questioning how an established industry leader had been blindsided by a startup. Investors demanded answers from Robert Pierce, who issued a terse statement promising a competitive response soon. What no one knew was that Nexus's technology was based on designs Pierce had been developing for years but had never successfully implemented. Designs I had seen in my previous life, when Robert had shown them to me as justification for my investment. The difference was that Nexus had actually made them work. Alina called me in a panic that morning. "James, it's a disaster. Dad needs to speak with you immediately." I agreed to meet them for lunch at an upscale restaurant downtown. When I arrived, Robert looked like he had aged a decade overnight. His usual confident demeanor was replaced by barely contained desperation. "James," he said, gripping my hand too tightly. "Thank you for coming." Alina sat beside him, her eyes red-rimmed. I wondered how much of her distress was genuine concern for her father and how much was fear for her own future. "What can I do for you, Robert?" I asked, signaling the waiter for a drink. "The situation is dire," he said, leaning forward. "This Nexus company has essentially stolen our technology. We're pursuing legal options, but in the meantime, we need to accelerate our own production to stay competitive." "And you need money," I said flatly. "Not just money. A partner. Someone we trust." He forced a smile. "Someone who's going to be family." I took a sip of my whiskey, letting the moment stretch. "How much?" "$5 million, Robert said. "With full partnership rights and a seat on the board for you." Double what Alina had asked for earlier. Their desperation was showing. "That's a significant investment," I said carefully, "especially for a company facing such serious challenges." Alina reached across the table to take my hand. "James, we need you. I need you. This isn't just about business. This is about our future together." I looked into her eyes, searching for any hint of genuine feeling. All I saw was calculation. "I'll need to review your current financials, all of them, and speak with your engineers about this supposed technology theft." Robert nodded eagerly. Of course. I'll have everything sent over immediately." "And I'd like to speak with Marcus about the legal strategy," I added, watching their reactions carefully. Alina's hand twitched in mine. Robert's smile froze. "Marcus?" Robert asked. "Your corporate counsel," I said innocently. "Alina mentioned he's been advising you on these matters." A look passed between father and daughter, too, quick to interpret. "Ah, yes, Marcus. I'll arrange it," Robert said, recovering quickly. After lunch, as we walked to our cars, Alina slipped her arm through mine. "Thank you for considering this. I know it's a lot to ask." "Anything for you," I lied. She smiled up at me, relief evident in her expression. "I was thinking after all this is settled, maybe we should talk about setting a date. For the wedding. The wedding that would never happen. The wedding that, in my previous life, had been scheduled for the day after I confronted her about her affair with Marcus. The day after my fatal accident." "I'd like that," I said, kissing her cheek. "Once everything is stable." Back at my office, I received a call from an unknown number. When I answered, a familiar voice spoke. "James Everett, this is Marcus Reeves. I understand you wanted to speak with me." I smiled to myself. The pieces were moving into place. "Marcus, yes. Thank you for calling. I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Are you free this evening?" There was a pause. "May I ask what this is regarding?" "Alina and Robert Pierce, and a rather significant investment I'm considering making in their company." Another pause. "I see. 7 o'clock at the Winston downtown? Perfect." When I arrived at the upscale bar, Marcus was already waiting in a private booth. He was exactly as I remembered him, with his tailored suit and carefully styled hair. The man Alina had chosen over me. The man who may have helped plan my death. "James," he said, standing to shake my hand. "I've heard a lot about you." "Likewise," I replied, sliding into the booth across from him. After ordering drinks, Marcus leaned forward. You wanted to discuss Pierce Innovations, among other things. I took out my phone and pulled up a photo, sliding it across the table. It showed an Elena entering his apartment building, his hand possessively on the small of her back. His expression remained carefully neutral. I'm not sure what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. You and Elena are involved, have been for months, possibly years. And now you're both pressuring me to invest millions in a failing company founded by her father. Marcus took a slow sip of his scotch. You seem remarkably calm about this. I'm a businessman, Marcus. I separate emotion from financial decisions. He studied me for a moment. What exactly do you want? Information, I said. About Pierce Innovations' real financial situation. About the technology they claim was stolen. About their contingency plans if things go south. And why would I provide that information? I smiled thinly. Because I suspect you're not as confident in the Pierces as you pretend to be. Because you want to protect yourself. And because I'm offering you immunity when this all falls apart. His eyes narrowed. Immunity from what? I slid another photo across the table, this one showing him, Elena and Robert at the lake house, reviewing my insurance documents. From whatever you three are planning, I said softly. The color drained from his face. This isn't what it looks like. Then tell me what it is. Our conversation lasted hours. By the end, Marcus had confirmed everything I suspected and revealed things I hadn't known, including the extent of Pierce Innovations' financial fraud and the existence of offshore accounts where Robert had been hiding investor money. Most importantly, he admitted that Robert had discussed removing obstacles before, and that certain investors who had asked too many questions had suffered convenient accidents. I never agreed to that part, Marcus insisted, his hands shaking slightly. I'm a lawyer, not a criminal. But you didn't stop it either, I pointed out. Marcus looked down at his empty glass. What are you going to do with this information? That depends on you, I said. I need someone on the inside. Someone who can provide evidence when the time comes. You won't need to betray them. I want you to save yourself, I corrected. When Pierce Innovations collapses, and it will, Robert will look for scapegoats. How confident are you that you won't be one of them? I could see the calculation in his eyes, weighing loyalty against self-preservation. What about Elena? He asked finally. What about her? Do you still love her? The question caught me off guard. Did I still love her? The woman who had planned my death for financial gain? The woman who had never truly loved me at all? No, I said, surprised by how easily the word came. I don't. Marcus nodded slowly. Then we have something in common. Because neither do I. My surprise must have shown on my face, because he laughed bitterly. You think this is a love story. It's a business arrangement. She needed someone with legal expertise to help her father. I needed connections to wealthy clients. The relationship was convenient for both of us. And the plan to eliminate me. His expression darkened. That was Robert's idea. Elena went along with it, because she's always been Daddy's girl. I advised against it, for what it's worth. Too messy. As I left the bar that night, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The final pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Marcus would be my inside man, providing documentation of the Pierce's illegal activities. My own company, Nexus, would continue to outperform Pierce Innovations, driving them toward financial ruin, and Elena, caught between her father's desperation and her own greed, would soon face a reckoning she never saw coming. The next morning, Elena called to inform me that Robert had prepared all the documents for my investment. They wanted to finalize everything at their family lake house that weekend, the same location where they had once planned my death. It will be perfect, she said, her voice warm and intimate. Just the three of us, celebrating our partnership. And afterward, maybe you and I can have some time alone to discuss our future. Sounds perfect. I agreed, thinking of the evidence Marcus had already begun sending to my secure email. I'm looking forward to it. As I hung up, I checked my stock portfolio. Nexus Innovations was up another 12%. Pierce Innovations had been downgraded by major analysts. The power had shifted. Now it was time for the endgame. The drive to the Pierce family lake house felt like a journey toward destiny. I watched the city fade in my rearview mirror, replaced by rolling countryside and eventually the dense forest surrounding the remote property. In my previous life, I had loved this place, had imagined bringing our children here someday. Now I saw it for what it was, a secluded location where questions could be asked and problems could disappear. Elena sat beside me, scrolling through her phone, occasionally reading aloud positive news about Pierce Innovations, carefully curated press releases designed to counter the damage Nexus had caused. Her father had pulled in favors from industry contacts, calling the Nexus technology unproven and potentially dangerous. It was the desperate flailing of a drowning man. "Dad says the investment documents are ready," she said, putting her phone away as we turned onto the private road leading to the lake. "He's so relieved you're stepping in." I nodded, keeping my eyes on the winding road. "Happy to help family." She placed her hand on my thigh, squeezing gently. "Your family, James, or you will be soon." The lake house came into view, an expansive timber and glass structure overlooking the water. Robert's Bentley was parked in the circular driveway, along with another car I recognized as belonging to Gerald Weber, Pierce Innovations CFO, a man I had met only briefly in my previous life. I hadn't expected Weber to be here. This was a complication. "Gerald's joining us?" I asked casually. Alina's hand tensed slightly on my leg. "Just for the paperwork." Dad wanted everything to be official. Or they wanted a witness, someone who could testify later that I had willingly signed whatever documents they placed in front of me. Robert greeted us at the door, all smiles and hearty handshakes. "James, my boy. Beautiful day for a new beginning." We followed him into the great room where Gerald Weber sat at the dining table, surrounded by stacks of documents. He stood when we entered, extending his hand. "Mr. Everett, good to see you again." "Likewise," I said, noting the nervous energy in his movements. Weber knew something wasn't right about this arrangement. "Drink?" Robert offered, already pouring scotch into crystal tumblers. "We have much to celebrate." I accepted the glass but didn't drink, remembering Marcus's warning that Robert sometimes helped negotiations along with pharmaceutically enhanced beverages. Instead, I moved to the windows, admiring the view of the lake while surreptitiously checking my phone. A text from Marcus confirmed that everything was in place on his end. "Beautiful property," I said. "Very private." "That's why we love it," Robert replied, coming to stand beside me. "No distractions, no interruptions, just family and important discussions." The way he emphasized "no interruptions" sent a chill down my spine. I wondered briefly if I had miscalculated, if coming here had been a mistake. But I had safeguards in place. If I didn't check in with certain people at specified times, things would be set in motion that the Pierces couldn't stop. "Shall we get down to business?" I suggested, turning away from the view. "I have another commitment this evening." Robert's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course. We wouldn't want to keep you." We moved to the dining table where Weber had arranged the documents in neat stacks. As Robert launched into an overview of the investment structure, I listened carefully for discrepancies from what Marcus had told me to expect. "So essentially your $5 million will be converted to preferred shares, with liquidation preference," Robert concluded, sliding the main agreement toward me. "You'll have board observation rights, though not a voting seat initially." This was different from what he had promised at lunch, a classic bait and switch. In my previous life, I would never have noticed the subtle downgrade of my position. "That wasn't our agreement," I said calmly. "We discussed full board membership and partnership rights." Robert waved his hand dismissively. "Minor details that can be addressed after the initial investment proves successful. We need to move quickly to counter this Nexus situation." I nodded as if considering this, then turned to Weber. "Gerald, as CFO, what's your assessment of Pierce Innovations' current cash position?" Weber glanced at Robert before answering. "We're facing some temporary liquidity constraints due to accelerated R&D expenses, but the fundamentals remain strong." "And the Westlake project?" I asked, referring to a venture Marcus had mentioned was particularly problematic. "I understand there were some issues with the clinical trials." Weber's eyes widened slightly. Robert cut in before he could respond. "Minor setbacks, all confidential of course. Nothing that affects the overall valuation." He laughed nervously. "You certainly do your homework, James." "I try to be thorough," I replied, flipping through the contract pages without signing. "Especially when investing significant sums." Elena, who had been unusually quiet, moved to stand behind me, her hands resting on my shoulders. "James, we should celebrate before getting lost in all these boring details. The sun is setting, and it's beautiful on the dock." An invitation to move to an even more isolated location. I checked my watch. "Actually, I need to make a quick call first. Business matter. Excuse me." Before they could object, I stepped out onto the front porch and called Marcus. "They're rushing you to sign. Weber is here." "Weber's a weak link," Marcus said immediately. "He knows about the offshore accounts. Push him on that. And if things get uncomfortable." "The package I sent you this morning, did you bring it?" I touched the inside pocket of my jacket, feeling the small recording device he had provided. "Yes. Turn it on now." And remember, if you don't feel safe, just leave. We have enough to move forward without this meeting." When I returned to the great room, the atmosphere had changed. Robert and Weber were having a heated, whispered conversation that stopped abruptly when I entered. Elena was pouring herself a large glass of wine, her earlier composure slipping. "Everything okay?" Robert asked with forced cheerfulness. "Fine," I said, taking my seat again. "Just needed to check on another investment." I turned to Weber. "Gerald, I was reviewing Pierce's last quarterly filing and noticed some discrepancies in the reported R&D expenditures. Can you clarify the allocation of those funds?" Weber's face paled. Would need to review the specific items you're referring to. The Cayman transfers specifically," I said quietly. The room went completely still. Robert's friendly demeanor vanished in an instant. "I think we should take a break from the business talk," he said coldly. "Gerald, why don't you organize those documents while I show James the new boat dock?" An invitation I had no intention of accepting. I remained seated, looking directly at Weber. "Actually, I'd prefer to finish our discussion about the Cayman accounts, the misrepresented clinical trial data, and the systematic defrauding of investors." Robert slammed his hand on the table. "What the hell are you playing at?" I kept my voice calm. "I'm declining your investment opportunity, Robert, and suggesting you consult with legal counsel immediately." "You little," Robert started, moving toward me, but Elena grabbed his arm. "Dad, don't," she warned, her eyes darting between us. "James, what is this about?" "If you have concerns, we can address them." "I have more than concerns, Elena. I have evidence." I stood slowly, maintaining distance from Robert. Evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Robert's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "You have nothing, and you're making a very dangerous mistake." "Am I? Or is the mistake thinking you could do to me what you've done to other investors who asked too many questions?" Recognition dawned in his eyes. "Marcus," he spat. "That backstabbing son of a bitch talked to you." Gerald Weber stood abruptly. "I should go. This is beyond my purview as CFO." "Sit down, Gerald," Robert ordered. "Nobody's going anywhere until we sort this out." The threat hung in the air. I kept my expression neutral, though my heart was racing. "Actually, I need to leave. I have an appointment with the Securities and Exchange Commission tomorrow morning. They're very interested in Pierce Innovations." Robert lunged across the table, grabbing my jacket. "You think you can threaten me? In my own house?" I didn't resist, knowing the recording device was capturing everything. "It's not a threat. It's already in motion. The only question is whether you'll face the consequences alone or drag your daughter down with you." Elena stepped forward, her mask of affection completely gone. "James, whatever you think you know, you're wrong. We can work this out. Like you worked things out with Marcus behind my back? Or like you planned to work things out on the bridge that night?" Her eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" "The accident that wasn't an accident. The convenient insurance payout. The problem that needed direct intervention." Robert released my jacket, taking a step back. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. "You're delusional. The SEC doesn't think so. Neither does the prosecutor I've been speaking with." I straightened my jacket and picked up my keys from the table. "This meeting is over. My investment offer is withdrawn, and I suggest you both contact your attorneys immediately." As I walked toward the door, Elena followed me. "James, wait. Please, this is all a misunderstanding." I turned to face her one last time. "Is it? Then explain the lake house meeting where you discussed my insurance policy. Explain why you've been sleeping with Marcus for years while planning our wedding. Explain why investors who ask questions tend to have unfortunate accidents." Tears filled her eyes, real ones this time. "James, I love you. I've always loved you. It was the final test, the last temptation. In my previous life, I might have wavered, might have wanted to believe her. But now, I saw the desperation behind the declaration, the calculation even in this moment of apparent vulnerability. No, Elena, you never loved me. You loved what I could provide. There's a difference." I opened the door. "Goodbye." As I walked to my car, I heard Robert shouting inside the house, things crashing. I drove away from the lake house for the last time, feeling neither triumph nor anger, just a profound sense of completion. The past was finally being laid to rest. The next morning, as promised, I met with SDC investigators. The evidence provided by Marcus, combined with my own documentation and the recorded conversation at the lake house, was more than enough to launch a formal investigation into Pierce Innovations. By afternoon, news of the probe had hit the financial press. Pierce Innovations stock was halted after falling 40%. Robert Pierce issued a statement denying all allegations and promising to cooperate fully with authorities. Elena didn't call. I hadn't expected her to. That evening, as I sat in my office watching the business channels cover the Pierce Innovation scandal, my assistant informed me that someone was waiting to see me. Marcus Reeves. I had him shown in. He looked haggard, tie loosened, hair disheveled. "It's done," he said without preamble. "Robert was arrested an hour ago. Securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy." "And Elena?" "Not yet, but they're looking at her involvement. She knew about the offshore accounts. She signed documents." He ran a hand through his hair. "They'll probably offer her a deal to testify against her father." I nodded, feeling strangely empty. "And you?" "Immunity, as promised. In exchange for my cooperation." He hesitated. "There's something else." "Something I found in Robert's files that you should see." He placed a folder on my desk. Inside was a detailed plan for what would have been my accident, scheduled for the night before my wedding to Elena. The same bridge, the same method, all carefully orchestrated to look like a tragic case of driving under the influence. She signed off on it. Marcus said quietly, "I thought you should know." I closed the folder. "Thank you." After Marcus left, I stood in my office window, looking out at the city lights. In 2 days, Nexus Innovations would announce its acquisition of key Pierce assets, cementing its position as the new industry leader. My company, my future. Meanwhile, the architects of my previous death were facing ruin and disgrace. Justice of a sort. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "We need to talk. Please." I deleted it without responding and put the phone away. There was nothing left to say. Tomorrow, I would go to the bridge where I had died in my previous life. Not out of morbid fascination, but to finally close that chapter. To let go of the man I had been and embrace the man I had become. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't getting even. It's moving on. 6 months passed. Robert Pierce was convicted on multiple counts of securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, his empire dismantled, his reputation destroyed. Gerald Weber took a plea deal and testified against his former boss, receiving a reduced sentence of 5 years. Marcus Reeves, true to our agreement, walked away with immunity, though his career in corporate law was effectively over, and Elena faced her own reckoning. Initially charged as a co-conspirator in her father's schemes, she eventually accepted a plea deal, admitting to knowledge of the fraud and agreeing to cooperate with prosecutors. The evidence against her was substantial, including her signatures on offshore account documents and emails discussing investor deception. What saved her from a prison sentence was the lack of direct evidence linking her to the planned accidents of troublesome investors, including mine. Her lawyers successfully argued that she had been under her father's influence, merely following his instructions without understanding the full implications. She received 5 years of probation and was barred from serving as an officer or director of any public company. The one who had once moved through high society with such confidence was now a pariah, her name synonymous with one of the biggest financial scandals in recent memory. I watched her fall from a distance, neither participating in the public condemnation nor offering any support. Meanwhile, Nexus Innovations flourished. Our medical monitoring technology received full FDA approval and was rapidly being adopted by hospitals nationwide. The company I had built on knowledge from my second chance was now valued at over $1 billion. I had become the success I had always had the potential to be, freed from the constraints of a relationship built on lies. I thought I had achieved closure until the day my assistant announced an unexpected visitor. "Elena Pierce is here to see you, sir. She doesn't have an appointment, but she insists it's important." For a moment, I considered refusing to see her. What could she possibly say that would matter now? But curiosity won out, that and perhaps a desire to confirm that the chapter was truly closed. Sent her in. The woman who entered my office was barely recognizable as the Elena I had known. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect makeup, replaced by a simple blouse and jeans, her face bare and drawn. She had lost weight, her cheekbones more prominent, dark circles under her eyes. "James," she said, her voice softer than I remembered. "Thank you for seeing me." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "What can I do for you, Elena?" She sat, placing her handbag carefully on the floor beside her. "I wanted to see you in person, to tell you I'm sorry, though I know that's completely inadequate." I studied her, looking for signs of manipulation, the old tactics she had deployed so effectively. All I saw was exhaustion and what appeared to be genuine remorse. "Why now?" I asked. "It's been 6 months since your sentencing." "I've been in therapy," she said, looking down at her hands. trying to understand how I became the person who could do those things, who could hurt someone who loved her. I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. The truth is, I did love you, James, in my way. But I loved my father more, and I loved the lifestyle this company provided. When he said we were in trouble, that we needed your money, I convinced myself it was just business, that he would be fine. And the accident? I asked, my voice even. Was that just business too? She flinched visibly. I never agreed to that. I swear it. I knew Dad was worried about you asking questions, but I never thought he would go that far. When Marcus showed me the plan, it was already in motion. I was horrified, but I was too weak to stop it. So we just went along with it. Tears filled her eyes. Yes, God help me I did, because I was a coward, because I didn't know how to stand up to my father, because I had spent my entire life being what he wanted me to be. Part of me wanted to believe her. Another part remembered the evidence Marcus had provided, her signature on documents, her presence at meetings where my elimination was discussed. What do you want from me, Elena? Forgiveness? Absolution? No. She wiped away a tear. I don't deserve either. I just wanted you to know that losing you, realizing what I threw away, it woke me up. I'm trying to be better, to make amends where I can. She reached into her purse and withdrew a small wooden box. This belonged to your grandfather. You mentioned once how much it meant to you. I found it when I was clearing out my things. She placed the box on my desk, a hand-carved chess piece holder my grandfather had made. I had assumed it was lost in the move after my death, another small cruelty in a larger betrayal. Thank you, I said, genuinely surprised by the gesture. I'm moving away, she continued. Starting over somewhere, no one knows my name or what I've done. I just wanted to see you one last time and give you that. As she stood to leave, I was struck by how little I felt. No lingering anger, no satisfaction in her downfall, not even pity. Just a calm acknowledgement that this person who had once been the center of my world was now simply someone from my past. Elena, I said as she reached the door. I hope you find what you're looking for. She gave me a sad smile. I hope so too. Goodbye, James. After she left, I opened the wooden box, examining the carefully carved chess pieces my grandfather had made by hand. A small note was tucked inside. I'm sorry for everything. I never deserved you. I placed the box in my desk drawer and returned to work, the encounter already fading like a distant memory. 2 days later, I drove to the bridge where I had died in my previous life. It was a clear autumn day, the water below reflecting a bright blue sky. I parked at the lookout point and walked to the middle of the bridge, stopping at the spot where my car had broken through the guardrail. From my pocket, I took the last photo of Elena and me together, taken at her father's lake house during happier times, or what I had believed were happier times. I looked at our smiling faces, at how tightly I had held her, how completely I had trusted her. With a deep breath, I tore the photo into pieces and let them fall into the current below, watching as they were carried away, not with anger or bitterness, but with a sense of completion. The final tie to a past that no longer defined me. As I walked back to my car, my phone rang. It was Michael, my business partner and now close friend, someone who had been part of my life in both timelines but who now played a much more significant role. James, great news. The hospital network deal is confirmed. We're expanding to 12 new states by next quarter. That's excellent, I replied, getting into my car. Let's celebrate tonight. Sounds good. Oh, and that new CFO candidate is impressive. Emily Chen, the one from Stanford. Her financial projections for the next 5 years are spot on. Emily Chen. The name was vaguely familiar from industry events, though we had never formally met. In my previous life, our paths wouldn't have crossed at all. Schedule a meeting with her next week, I said. I'd like to talk to her myself. Later that evening, as Michael and I celebrated our company's latest success, he asked me a question that caught me off guard. Are you happy, James? Really happy? I considered the question seriously. Was I happy? My company was thriving. I had genuine friendships, not the superficial connections that had surrounded me in my relationship with Elena. I was making a difference in healthcare with technology that would save lives, but there was still something missing. A personal connection that went beyond business success or casual relationships. I had been so focused on undoing the past, on avoiding the trap that had claimed my life, that I hadn't fully embraced the opportunity to build something new. I'm getting there, I answered honestly. One day at a time. The following week, I met Emily Chen. She was brilliant forthright, with a dry sense of humor that caught me by surprise. When she challenged some of my assumptions about the company's 5-year plan, I found myself intrigued rather than defensive. At the end of the interview, as we shook hands, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. a genuine connection with someone who saw me for who I was now, not who I had been or what I could provide. I have one more question, I said as she prepared to leave. Why Nexus? You could work anywhere with your qualifications. She smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. Because you're doing something that matters. And because I'd rather build something meaningful than just chase profit margins. I found myself smiling back. Would you like to continue this conversation over dinner? To discuss your ideas for the company? I'd like that, she replied. But let's be clear, if this is a date, it should be separate from any job offer. I don't mix business and personal life. Her directness was refreshing. Fair enough. The job is yours regardless. The dinner invitation stands on its own merits. That evening, as we talked about everything from healthcare innovation to favorite books, I realized that my second chance hadn't just been about avoiding death or exposing Elena's betrayal. It had been about creating space for a life I never would have known otherwise. The past would always be part of me, the lessons learned too valuable to forget. But for the first time since waking up 5 years in the past, I found myself looking forward without the shadow of what had been hanging over me. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting free. And sometimes freedom is just the beginning of a much better story.